Friedrich Nietzsche's 1882 work, The Gay Science, contains some of the most controversial philosophical statements ever penned. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. Nietzsche wasn't making a celebratory statement, but rather a sobering warning about the fall of the belief systems that had steered Western civilization for generations. At its heart, this idea reflects the impact of the Enlightenment, science, and secularization, which led to a rejection of religious dogma in favor of a belief in reason and progress. But I saw this as a double-edged sword. Without religion's moral framework, humanity would be left to wander aimlessly in a world devoid of absolute values and meaning. To illustrate this existential crisis, he used the parable of the madman. In it, a man storms into a marketplace, proclaiming that God has died and that we are his murderers. The crowd laughs, not understanding the gravity of his words. The madman laments, "What did we do when we freed this earth from its sun? Are we not constantly plunging into abyss? Is there any hope for the future? Never mind the ups and downs. Without God as our anchor, humanity is doomed to nihilism, the belief that life has no purpose, like the myth of Cleifas, in which the protagonist, Copus, is doomed to continually roll a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down again. This seemingly pointless tale serves as a metaphor for the human condition in Albert Camus' essay, The Myth of Copus. The author ponders the ultimate question: is life worth living if it lacks inherent meaning? The absurdity of existence, as the author explains, stems from the conflict between our pursuit of purpose and the universe's indifference. Instead of succumbing to despair, the author discovers liberation in the struggle itself, which is enough to fill a man's heart. Copus, trapped in an endless cycle of toil without hope of success, feels trapped, but the author reclaims his story by embracing the absurd, admitting the futility of his task. Transcends his punishment, the gods control his fate, but not his defiance. In his rebellion, he finds freedom, refusing to accept nihilism or false hope. Instead, he embraces life's absurdity, viewing each moment as a chance to create meaning, not because the universe demands it, but because we choose it. Like Copus, we face our own endless struggles. The fear of death may influence every decision you make and every belief you hold. According to the terror management theory, which was developed in the 1980s by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pasinski, it builds on Ernest Becker's theory of the denial of death and argues that humans are shaped by this awareness. As a species, humans confront an existential threat that could paralyze us if we don't find ways to cope with it. In an effort to find purpose in life and a sense of belonging, we construct cultural worldviews based on religion, art, and nationalism. However, when these worldviews are challenged, our fear of death returns. Research indicates that even small reminders of our own mortality, known as mortality salience, can have a profound impact on people's behavior. Fear of death shapes not only individuals but also societies. Our monuments, traditions, and rituals serve as defenses against death's shadow, giving us a sense of permanence and comfort in the face of negative utilitarianism and the universality of pain. As a result, we become more defensive of our cultural values, resistant to opposing ideas, and even hostile toward those who challenge our beliefs. While there is no comparable call to increase the happiness of a man who is doing well anyway, for Pioa, alleviating suffering is not just important, it's morally urgent. This idea was articulated by philosopher Karl Popper in The Open Society and Its Enemies writing, and it forces us to confront the harrowing question of whether ethics aims to reduce suffering or create happiness. This philosophy, which is based on utilitarianism, aims to maximize well-being. However, it differs from traditional utilitarianism in that it prioritizes preventing harm rather than promoting happiness. The reasoning behind this is that while pleasure can brighten a moment, intense or chronic pain can dominate a life. Few would trade constant agony for fleeting happiness. Critics of this philosophy point out its unsettling implications, such as how should we prioritize reducing suffering if it is paramount? In a world plagued with avoidable suffering, hunger, disease, and war, shouldn't the urgent moral challenge of reducing pain outweigh the more extreme goals of negative utilitarianism, such as the elimination of all sentient life? Philosopher David Pearce, an advocate of such views, proposes a less drastic approach by utilizing science and technology to end suffering. The pursuit of happiness makes us wonder if our morality is based on preventing suffering rather than creating it. Isn't that the most important aspect of life? Another concept that philosopher Michel Foucault developed in her work on punishment and discipline is panopticism. It shows how the possibility of observation shapes behavior and extends control beyond physical boundaries. Foucault was inspired by the panopticism, according to Foucault, isn't about actual surveillance, but rather the fear of it, the mere possibility of being watched. This idea was developed from Jeremy Bentham's penitentiary design, which included a circular structure with cells surrounding a central watchtower. The genius of this design wasn't in constant observation, but in creating a state of conscious and permanent visibility. The principle of panopticism, which is born out of a made-up relationship, is pervasive in today's society. It's used in everything from security cameras in the workplace to monitoring on social media platforms. Whether you use them to express yourself or to influence how others see you, the power is shifted from outside forces to inside you. This trend extends beyond technology as well, into institutions like schools, hospitals, and governments that employ observation and classification too. According to Foucault, contemporary societies have shifted their focus from physical punishment to psychological control. This shift has led to serious questions about the extent to which our freedom is an illusion, who is watching, and why. Being aware of this dynamic gives us an opportunity to resist panopticism, which isn't really about being watched, but about believing we are. Recognizing that belief is the first step toward reclaiming control, as is the idea put forth by Jean-Paul Sartre. Hell is other people, not where you go, but who you're with, discovers a deep truth about human relationships. According to Sartre, the core of torment is being ensnared in the scrutiny of others. Our lives are impacted by how others perceive us, and we end up viewing ourselves through their eyes instead of our own. Imagine yourself in front of a distorted mirror. No matter how much you try to correct it or explain it, the reflection defines you in the eyes of those watching. SRA argued that it's a constant struggle to be ourselves around other people. Every look, every opinion forces you to present an image that might not be true to who you really are. This dynamic isn't an isolated incident. It's an essential aspect of being human. Craving approval keeps us from being truly ourselves, according to Sartre, who believe that being seen makes us feel like objects and takes away our autonomy in defining ourselves. There's an inherent tension in all things, even at their best. When we are around other people, it creates an invisible web of expectations and judgments that we can't escape. It's a constant pull between wanting to be seen and the loss of freedom that comes with it. The universe we see has the properties we should expect if there is zero design, zero purpose, zero evil, zero good, and pitiless indifference. The essence of discology, as described by Richard Dawkins, is the belief that pain exists without meaning, purpose, or redemption, that nature is indifferent to suffering, that predators hunt their prey, and that parasites thrive, all as a result of survival rather than morality or design. According to this view, suffering is not a test or lesson, but rather an inevitable consequence of life's relentless processes. The term discology is a combination of the Greek words telos and logia, which means goddess, and logia. Sadine nihilism is a philosophy that challenges the very essence of morality. It rejects comforting narratives that suffering serves a greater good and instead shows a world driven by chaos and competition rather than divine order. Sadine nihilism begins with the provocative works of Marquis Dada and continues with its core principles. Desade vehemently rejects the idea of universal moral truths, arguing that concepts such as justice and virtue are imposed by humans on an impersonal and immoral natural world. In his novel Justine, he states, "Nature has created us all soul to torment one another for dad." This perspective on humanity reflects this ruthless indifference, as Desade perceive people as beings controlled by instincts rather than logic or ethics. More than a product of human imagination, he came to the conclusion that its rules should not be strictly enforced. In his philosophy of the bedroom, he asserted that genuine freedom is found in giving in to one's natural desires, regardless of how destructive or transgressive they may be. On the other hand, he raised the question of why we experience such intense horror at the sight of a decaying corpse, and why we react negatively to things that blur the line between what is human and what is inhuman. These reactions are rooted in our objection, a concept explored by Julia Kristeva in her book, Powers of Horror. Psychological unease we experience when something breaks the boundaries that define our sense of self. According to Kristeva, our sense of self is based on clear distinctions between ourselves, other people, and the world around us. Anything that breaks these boundaries, whether it's blood or vomit, makes us uncomfortable because it blurs the line between the inside and outside, reminding us of our physicality, vulnerability, and mortality. Decomposition occupies a space between humans and other forms of life. It forces us to face the inevitability of death, a truth that we try to evade at all costs. And at the core of samsara, the Buddhist concept of reincarnation is not merely a metaphor for the struggle of this world, but rather an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, governed by the law of cause and effect, known as karma. Juna likens samsara to a sea of suffering, endlessly tossing waves of birth and death. In this sea, all beings, from insects to kings, are bound by the same karmic chains. So, samsara never truly tormenting, but rather it is an illusion that traps us. We chase after temporary happiness, believing it will bring fulfillment, only to be disappointed. So, samsara is a constant reminder that nirvana is not a location but a state beyond suffering, desire, and individuality. It is the ultimate freedom. However, to reach nirvana, one must let go of attachments and perceive the world for what it really is, impermanent, interconnected, and devoid of inherent essence. Existence precedes nirvana, the source of suffering, according to Buddhist teachings. Being in nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre's seminal work in Existentialist philosophy, encapsulates the central thesis that humans are not born with an inherent nature or purpose, but rather shape our essence through our deeds and decisions. Sartre contends that our identity is not based on our inherent qualities, but on the things we do. Sartre further differentiates between two modes of existence: being in itself and being for itself. The former describes immobile, unchanging objects like rocks and chairs, while the latter lacks the ability to undergo any kind of transformation. In contrast, the idea of nothingness is central to SRA's philosophy. Human consciousness, unlike inanimate objects, is dynamic, incomplete, and defined by our capacity to reflect, choose, and imagine possibilities. This gap between ourselves and the world lets us imagine what else is possible and act freely, but it also carries the heavy burden of responsibility for shaping our lives and humanity as a whole through our decisions. Carl Jung coined the term shadow to describe the hidden aspect of ourselves that we either deny or project onto other people. Whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, it influences our identity. The shadow encompasses all the things we want to hide, including our dark impulses, forbidden desires, and unacknowledged flaws. It's not just about evil, though. It's any aspect of ourselves that doesn't match the image we want to project. The shadow is born when we fail to repress these characteristics during childhood in order to conform to societal or familial expectations. However, the more we bury these aspects of ourselves, the more power they gain. Jung warned that until you become conscious of your unconscious, it will control your life, and you will refer to it as fate. Your shadow can show up in subtle ways, like anger that you project, envy that passes for criticism, or insecurities that drive your choices. Jung referred to this process as fronting the shadow or shadow integration. Humanity is frequently lauded as a marvel of evolution, capable of art, science, and love. However, to those who hold a pessimistic view, we are a species defined by greed, cruelty, and self-destruction. Is this a harsh reality, or just the disappointment of those who perceive things too clearly? Throughout history, ancient Greeks have echoed their distrust or hatred of humanity. Despite his doubts about the existence of honest people, philosopher Diogenes carried a lantern around Athens in his purported search for one. Arthur Schopenhauer expanded on this idea, describing humanity as a power that is blindly selfish and responsible for the perpetuation of suffering. Those who hold the view that humans are capable of more destruction than good argue that our intelligence often leads us to do more harm than good. At its core, nihilism challenges us to face life as it truly is, unfiltered and raw, and reject the systems we rely on, such as morality, religion, and identity. It argues that the values and beliefs that once gave life meaning are now meaningless, leaving a void in our lives. Nihilism is a philosophy that strips away assumptions and forces us to confront reality without comforting illusions. Where certainty once resided, when these frameworks crumble, we are left to wonder if our values and aspirations are still valid. Without an ultimate truth or purpose, what gives us the strength to pursue them? On the one hand, some view nihilism as an opportunity for deep liberation, since without it, people are free to create their own meaning and values. On the other hand, there are many who see it as a path towards anarchy and human sacrifice mythos. From Aztec temples to Celtic druids, from ancient China to modern-day Japan, countless civilizations have practiced human sacrifice as a means of appeasing gods, seeking favor, or restoring balance. The practice has long been a source of despair for those without a higher power or objective meaning in their lives, as it runs the risk of reducing existence to a series of pointless acts where morality becomes subjective and existence feels hollow. In Mesopotamia, the central belief was that blood was the most valuable commodity in the cosmos. The Aztecs believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humanity owed them a debt. Historian David Carrasco pointed out that the sun wouldn't rise without blood, so sacrifice was necessary for the survival of the universe. Why was human life held in such high regard, though, compared to that of animals or crops? Philosophers and historians alike pondered this question. The psychologist René Girard hypothesized that sacrifice developed as a means of resolving social conflicts. His scapegoat mechanism theory postulated that, in order to restore unity, society would channel its collective guilt or fear onto a single victim. However, sacrifice served a political purpose as well, as it served to strengthen the authority of priests and rulers who saw themselves as intermediaries between humans and the divine. In Christianity today, the practice of human sacrifice is no longer practiced, but its echoes linger in stories and the concept of sacrifice for greater causes. What drives us to sabotage ourselves, to choose disorder over survival, and to introduce the beyond the pleasure principle in our 1920 work by the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, was a dark and primal force that he believed held the answer. At its core, the death drive reflects a desire to return to a state of non-existence, a primordial stillness. Prior to this, thanatos, or the pleasure principle, was Freud's primary focus. It was the idea that humans seek pleasure and avoid pain. However, he found it puzzling that not all behavior aligns with this instinct. For example, some people engage in self-sabotage, repeat harmful patterns, and gravitate towards suffering. At its core, radical skepticism is a philosophy that asks, how do you know anything at all? It manifests in decay, risky behaviors, and the self-destructive tendencies that are prevalent in both individuals and societies. Before life began, according to Freud, this urge was inherent in organic life. René Descartes, a philosopher from the 17th century, faced this head-on. He doubted everything: his senses, the world around him, and even his own body. I suppose, he wrote, some malevolent demon has employed all his energies to deceive me. Even the most fundamental truths, like the existence of the external world, could be called into question. In his quest for absolute certainty, Dirk came to one unshakable realization: coito ergo sum. He reasoned, I am, the act of doubting itself, proved his existence as a thinking being, but this. Radical skepticism isn't limited to philosophy books. It appears whenever someone makes an assumption about the world, like the sun rising tomorrow, based on probabilities rather than guarantees. David Hume expanded on this skepticism by arguing that our minds are just a collection of transitory perceptions connected by habit rather than logic. Hume even challenged the concept of causality, asking how we can know that one event causes another. Step into the unsettling world of dreaming and reality. It offers no comforting answers, only the truth. Certainty is elusive. The more we probe reality, the more it dissolves. The next time you feel sure about something, pause and ask yourself why God is silent. This is the problem that has haunted humanity for centuries. The question doesn't ask whether God exists, but why he seems to exist. The Danish philosopher Søren Kard described faith as the contradiction between the infinite passion of inwardness and the objective uncertainty. In times of suffering and doubt, he wrestled with this silence, seeing it not as absence, but as a test of faith. For Kard, the silence demanded a leap into the unknown, a trust in God without tangible proof. For thinkers like Simone V., the silence of God becomes paradoxical and suffering. But for her, it was an invitation to find meaning within, not abandonment. Her writing highlights how Christianity's strength lies in its refusal to seek a supernatural solution to suffering, but rather a supernatural purpose for it. However, this raises a more sinister question. What if the stillness isn't a test or a mystery, but simply silence? What if there is no divine voice, no presence, and no answer whatsoever? Antinatalism, a troubling philosophical concept, argues that this gamble isn't worth it, asserting that. David Beneder, a prominent figure in modern antinatalism, argues in his book Better Never to Have Been that having a child is inherently harmful, regardless of one's intentions. Beneder bases his argument on the asymmetry of pleasure and pain, stating that while the former is bad and the latter is good, he goes on to say that the absence of pain is good regardless of who is around to feel it, and that the absence of pleasure is not bad either. While many view life as a blessing, Beneder views it as a heavy load laden with unavoidable hardships like hunger, illness, loss, and death. Life does have its joys, but Beneder contends that they are transient and frequently overshadowed by pain. When you take a close look at your life, you'll see that most of it is suffering with the hope of experiencing brief moments of happiness. Life is assured to the will to live. Therefore, it clings to it even in the most miserable of circumstances, according to Arthur Schopenhauer, who characterized it as an insatiable desire to survive, reproduce, and persist, but which is neither rational nor conscious or purposeful. This desire motivates you to keep going even when the going gets tough. However, the will is not a wellspring of joy, but rather the source of pain. Schopenhauer stated that pleasure is transient while suffering is ever present, and he wrote, all satisfaction is only negative the removal of a desire and pain. This struggle is inherent in nature, and it consumes and reshapes life in the endless cycle of survival. In contrast to animals, humans often find themselves trapped by their own ambitions, which leads to a sense of emptiness. The concept of ontological insecurity was first introduced by psychiatrist R.D. Laing in his work, The Divided Self. It goes beyond being a psychological state. Rather, it poses a profound challenge to our understanding of identity and existence. Psychiatrist Laing defines ontological insecurity as the sensation that one's being is fragile or on the brink of collapse. This uncertainty can lead to a heightened state of misery. For the majority of people, life moves along smoothly. They have faith in themselves, their relationships, and the world around them. However, for those who struggle with ontological insecurity, this stability can be unstable. They may feel detached, question their perceptions, and even doubt their own coherence. To describe this state, there are three fears. First, engulfment, which is the fear of being consumed by others or losing oneself in relationships. As a result, they avoid being intimate in order to protect their fragile sense of self. Second, implosion is the fear of being overwhelmed by inner chaos or the vastness of existence itself. The third is petrification, the feeling of being seen as an object stripped of humanity and agency. Ontological insecurity often appears in conditions like schizophrenia or severe anxiety, where self-world boundaries dissolve. Lang saw it not as pathology, but as a response to a chaotic or isolating world. This idea echoes existentialist philosophy. For SRA, the disorienting awareness of existence or nausea mirrors the destabilizing nature. Moral nihilism asks, what if these universal truths, good, evil, right and wrong, were just stories we made up to bring order to an otherwise chaotic universe? In response to the unsettling feeling that we're being thrust into a world beyond our control, a feeling that many of us can relate to. Empathy is the first step in comprehending this ontological insecurity. Idea that morality isn't grounded in reality, but rather a creation of our own imaginations. J.L. Mackie, a prominent figure in the moral nihilism movement, begins his book Ethics, inventing right and wrong with the bold claim that there are no objective values. According to Mackie, moral claims such as justice, kindness, and cruelty aren't facts about the world, but rather projections of human emotions and social conventions. To back up his claim, Mackie cites relativity across cultures and history. Moral codes differ wildly. One society's virtue is another's vice. If morality were truly objective, shouldn't we expect more consistency? Mackie suggests that these differences arise not from universal truths, but from human needs shaped by specific context. The second is the argument from queerness. If objective moral values existed, they'd be unlike anything else in the universe, strange metaphysical entities guiding human behavior. How could we even detect such things? From Mackie, this idea is implausible. Further, cosmic horror exists in the vast, indifferent, and incomprehensible universe. For every star we see, countless others remain hidden, their light lost to the void. It is in this infinite silence that cosmic horror finds its home. Moral nihilism does not demand lawlessness or chaos. Instead, it posits morality as a useful fiction. Rules like stealing is wrong aren't cosmic truths, but they are tools that promote social stability. Our insignificance in the vastness of space and the universe's apparent lack of interest in our plight are the source of the existential terror that H.P. Lovecraft so eloquently described in his writings. Fear, not of monsters, but of the unknown, the realization that our familiar world is suspended in a dark abyss controlled by forces beyond our comprehension, is the primal human emotion. Is there a fundamental essence to who we are beyond our thoughts and experiences? David Hume posed the revolutionary idea of the bundle theory of the self in his treatise on human nature, which questions our very sense of identity. In this state of uncertainty, cosmic horror lurks, compelling us to face truths that could shatter our understanding. It's like an ant on a smartphone, only aware of the surface. Hume contended that our internal experiences do not reveal a static, unchanging self, but rather a flux of perceptions, sensations, thoughts, and emotions. He described this flux as follows. Whenever I go deeply into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception, and I can never observe anything but the perception. Our sense of self, according to Hume, is like a movie reel. The frames blur together to give the impression of motion, but when you pause the reel, you see individual, disconnected images. This raises questions about concepts like identity, responsibility, and morality. since there is no central self to answer for our actions. Critics like Immanuel Kant contended that. Hume's theory offers a liberating thought. If we're a bundle of experience and energy, we're free to grow and redefine ourselves with every passing moment. Determinism encompasses everything from every decision we've ever made to what we ate for breakfast. Modern neuroscience supports this idea, revealing the brain as a patchwork of systems working in parallel without a central coordinator. Organizing perceptions requires a stable self, according to others, but memory and narrative are what really create continuity. Everything you've become may not have been a choice at all. According to determinism, every action, thought, and event is the result of prior causes, rendering freedom an illusion. This idea has its roots in ancient philosophy, but it was 18th century mathematician Pierre-Simon Lazes who brought it to life with his concept of the Lazes demon. This hypothetical intelligence could predict the future with absolute certainty, because it would know the position and motion of every particle in the universe. Laplace wrote that nothing would be uncertain or unexpected. Future like the past would be present before its eyes. Determinism rests on cause and effect from atomic movements to neural firings. Every action is bound by prior events. If time were rewound, every thought and action would unfold exactly the same way, as they were never truly under your control. Animal suffering in theodicy. If God is all good and all-powerful, why does innocent suffering exist, especially among animals? Incapable of moral failings, this question's central to animal suffering in theodicy. Challenges rel. Animals have endured pain and suffering for millions of years due to things like predators, diseases, starvation, and natural disasters. Unlike humans, they are unable to rationalize or find meaning in this pain. Philosopher William Rowe famously used the example of a barn caught in a wildfire, which she endures tremendously before dying alone, to illustrate this point. Rowe asks, what purpose does this serve if none exists? Such suffering challenges the existence of an all-good. On one hand, the greater good defense posits that animal suffering serves a higher purpose in the universe, balancing ecosystems and promoting complexity. On the other hand, proponents of free will argue that the unpredictable nature of the natural world is essential to human freedom, but animals lack the moral agency to fully understand this. And finally, proponents of John Hick's proposal that suffering is essential for soul-making, shaping moral and spiritual growth, raise the question of what kind of spiritual growth actually occurs. Concerns about animal suffering have been raised by critics such as David Atfield, who argues that defenses like these fail when applied to animals like gazelles or infected birds. This goes beyond the question of whether or not other people are really conscious, that is, able to think, feel, and experience the world around them in the same way that you do, whether they're your closest friends, relatives, or complete strangers. There is no clear answer to the philosophically perplexing question of minds, because consciousness is inherently subjective. While we can know for sure that we are conscious of our own thoughts and emotions, we can only infer that other people are conscious based on their behavior. For example, a grin could indicate happiness, while tears could indicate sadness. Is this reflective of genuine inner experience or merely an outward display? How can we know for sure that other people aren't just philosophical zombies that appear conscious but lack genuine awareness? René Descartes famously declared, I think, therefore, I am proving his own consciousness, but he couldn't extend that certainty to others, leaving their minds in open question. Modern neuroscience maps brain activity and correlates it with thoughts and feelings, but even this doesn't access the subjective experience of another person. We can measure the brain's mechanisms, but not at inner reality. Here's the unsettling twist: just as you can't prove others are conscious, no one can prove you are. From my point of view, it's possible that you're just another mindless automaton going through the motions. This question makes me question my morals, my relationships, and my capacity for empathy, but I refuse to face the alternative, a world where my mind is the only reality. I'm dying, not someday far in the future, but right now, with each breath I take. This stark truth forms the basis of Martin Heidegger's concept of approaching death. Heidegger argued that the moment a man is born, he is also old enough to die, highlighting the fact that death is an inherent part of our being, but the exact moment and nature of it are mysteries. As a result, unlike any other experience, death is both certain and entirely unknown. As a result, most of us try to escape this reality by becoming engrossed in our daily lives and conforming to societal norms, a state that Heidegger referred to as the self. Illusion of permanence, as if death were far away and abstract. However, according to Heidegger, this kind of living is inauthentic because it avoids facing one's own mortality. Instead, we should face death head-on, which he calls being toward death. By doing so, we take responsibility for our lives and make more meaningful decisions, turning them into a series of deliberate choices instead of mindless motions. This isn't despair, but rather freedom, because we realize that time is precious and act accordingly. Break free from illusions and live authentically, realizing that life's value lies in its impermanence. Confronting death, he argued, can we truly live? He proposed the idea of kawa-sway, which is the idea of something being able to create itself and exist without any external cause. Stop living for others or meaningless distractions and start living for yourself, fully aware of your finite existence. The concept of self-cause is deeply troubling because it forces us to question our understanding of logic and forces us to reconsider the fundamental nature of existence. Baruch Spinoza first used it to describe God, or substance, in ethics. According to Spinoza, anything that exists solely because of its inherent nature and is determined to act independently is free. This idea challenges our understanding of causality, as everything depends on something else. For example, a tree grows from seed, starting with a seed from another tree. But where does the chain begin? Spinoza's radical answer involves something that exists without a cause. It is the cause causui. This idea reverberates in existential philosophy, where thinkers like Sartre delve into the human yearning to be self-created or the project of being God. The struggle to define ourselves, free from external influences, shapes our very existence. In science, questions about the universe's origins and evolution echo the concept of kawa-sway. Kawa-sway forces us to confront a paradox. Can anything truly cause itself, or is it a reflection of our longing to escape the web of causes that define us? If everything has a cause, then what caused the universe? Could it have created itself, or does it require an external first cause? Spinoza argues that the universe doesn't need a reason to exist. It just does. This idea isn't about escaping causality, but rather understanding it. In the 198, Daniel Vanner introduced the concept of ironic process theory, which reveals an oddity of the mind. The more we attempt to push away a thought, don't think about the white bear, the more likely it is to intrude. But why does this happen? When we try to suppress a thought, our minds split into two processes. The first actively tries to push it away, and ironically, this monitoring keeps. Illness sufferers who attempt to stifle worry frequently find themselves wide awake. Dieters who fixate on forbidden foods, ex-lovers who try to forget them only make them more prominent, and so on. Vanner demonstrated this in experiments where participants were told not to think about a white bear, but the more they tried, the more often the thought surfaced. This isn't just a mental quirk. It has real-world implications. A different center. Like thinking about a black cat can reduce the intrusive thought's power, letting thoughts pass rather than fighting them also helps, much like watching clouds drift in the sky. The lesson suppression fuels obsession. Instead of wrestling with your mind, let the thought come and go. Because like a stubborn bear, overthrew it the stronger, it becomes state of nature. As wars strip away laws, governments, and societal rules, what's left for philosopher Thomas Hobbes? It's chaos, a brutal war of every man against every man. This is the state of nature, a world without authority, which Hobbes saw as humanity's raw, unfiltered reality In his 1651 work ban, Hobbes argued that life in the state of nature will be driven by fear and competition, humans motivated by self, and survival would clash endlessly over resources and power. In such condition, he wrote, "The life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Why such chaos?" Hobbes pointed to equality, not the noble kind, but the kind that makes everyone equally dangerous. Even the weakest can harm the strongest through cunning or alliances, creating perpetual mistrust. Without rules or authority to ensure safety, people would live in constant suspicion, ready to strike first. This isn't just theory. Hobbes pointed to civil wars and societal breakdowns as glimpses of the state of nature. Yet he didn't see humans as evil, just rational in a world without order. Survival demands preemptive conflict. Hobbes believed the only escape was the social contract, individuals surrendering some freedom to a sovereign authority, the Leviathan, in exchange for security and peace. This authority, wielding absolute power, keeps the chaos of the state of nature at bay. While critics argue Hobbes underestimated human cooperation, his vision resonates today. From political instability to international tensions, the shadow of the state of nature reminds us what's at stake. Hobbes challenges us to ask what truly holds civilization together, and how far are we willing to go to preserve its fallenness of. Do we spend our lives scrolling, chasing fleeting pleasures, and following routines? But is this truly living? Martin Heidegger called this the fallenness of Dar, revealing an unsettling truth about human existence. Much of what we do is a distraction from facing who we really are in being, and time. Heidegger introduces the concept of Dasein, meaning being there, or existence. Dasein represents the human condition, our unique capacity to question life and seek meaning. Yet, instead of confronting these profound questions, we fall into what Heidegger termed fallenness, a passive absorption in the trivial and superficial. Fallenness isn't about morality, it's an existential state. Heidegger describes it as being lost into letting societal norms and expectations dictate our lives. We conform to what they think, say, and do, losing touch with our authentic selves. We curate perfect online personas, chase trends without questioning their value, and fill our days with distractions to avoid facing deeper truths. At its core, fallenness is a flight from anxiety. For Heidegger, anxiety isn't mere fear, it's the unsettling awareness of our freedom to shape life without a predetermined purpose. This realization exposes the void at the heart of existence. Instead of embracing this freedom, we retreat into routine and convention, avoiding the discomfort of authenticity. But anxiety, paradoxically, can liberate us. Heidegger believed it could jolt us out of fallenness, forcing us to confront our finitude and take responsibility for our choices. Authenticity lies not in rejecting society, but in consciously defining our own purpose. Moral desert. Do we truly deserve anything? The concept of moral desert questions whether people genuinely earn the rewards or punishments they receive. On the surface, it seems fair. Good actions deserve good outcomes, and bad actions deserve bad ones. But dig deeper, and this belief starts to reveal. Philosophers like John R.S. argue that much of what we consider deserved depends on factors beyond our control, and a theory of justice. R.S. points out that traits like intelligence, talents, and even moral character are shaped by luck, our upbringing, genetics, and environment. If these foundational aspects of who we are aren't chosen, how can we claim to deserve anything? For example, someone born into wealth may achieve success through hard work, but their opportunities were built on advantages they didn't earn. Conversely, someone born into poverty may struggle despite equal or greater effort. Moral desert assumes a level playing field, but life rarely provides one. Bernard Williams goes further, suggesting that morality shouldn't focus on rewarding or punishing individuals, but on creating systems that promote fairness and well-being. He sees deservingness as a distraction often used to just efface inequality rather than address it. Determinism complicates things further. If our actions are shaped by prior causes, biology, environment, and experience, how much control do we really have? If free will is an illusion, can anyone truly deserve their fate? This debate has real-world implications. Meritocracies claim to reward effort, but If effort itself depends on unequal conditions, is this justice? And in criminal justice, punishment based on desert ignores systemic factors that shape behavior. The Bamel mind. What if human consciousness is far younger than we think? This is the bold idea behind the Bamel mind, a theory proposed by Julian James in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness. In the breakdown of the Bamel mind, James argued that ancient humans, as recently as 3,000 years ago, were not conscious as we are today. Instead, their minds operated in two chambers, one giving commands and the other obeying, interpreting these commands as the voices of gods. James pointed to texts like the Iliad, where characters lack introspection and attribute decisions to divine voices. He believed these weren't metaphors, but literal experiences, with one brain hemisphere producing commands and the other hearing them. This Bamel mind provided clear authoritative guidance essential for survival in chaotic early societies. Over time, societal complexity and the development of written language led to the breakdown of this system. As external pressures like wars and migrations increased, humans adapted, fostering introspection and the emergence of modern self-awareness. For James, this marked the birth of consciousness as we know it. Critics call the theory speculative, questioning its neurological basis and reliance on textual interpretation. However, James's ideas provoke profound questions. Is modern consciousness a relatively recent development shaped by history? Could it be more fragile and contingent than we assume? If consciousness once emerged from societal and environmental pressures, could it also fade under different conditions? James' theory forces us to consider whether our sense of self is an eternal human trait or a fleeting product of a particular moment in history. The undead God is dead. His unsettling proclamation in the gay science signaled the collapse of divine authority, leaving humanity untethered. But what if God isn't truly gone? What if God lingers, not alive, but undead, a shadow embedded in our morality, culture, and subconscious? This is the concept of the undead God, a deity stripped of power, yet haunting our values and institutions. N's warning wasn't about atheism's triumph, but the danger of clinging to systems rooted in a belief we've abandoned. He saw humanity as trapped in the remnants of old frameworks, unwilling to confront the void left behind. As he wrote, what are these morals if they are not the shadows of God? Shadows of shadows. The problem is stark without God. What justifies concepts like good and evil, justice and freedom, and argued that these ideals, once grounded in divine command, now float unearned. We reject religious authority, yet treat these values as sacred absolutes, even as their foundations crumble. Modern life offers unsettling proof. Ideals like equality and morality are upheld as self-evident truths, yet they remain tethered to theological roots we no longer acknowledge. The undead God lives on, shaping our world, even as we deny its existence. And didn't merely diagnose this crisis, he demanded action. He urged us to slay the undead God by re-evaluating values and creating new ones free from inherited belief. This is the path of the Übermensch, forging meaning in a world without absolutes. Are you living under the shadow of an undead God, or are you ready to confront the void and create meaning? A new nature specter challenges us. The choice is yours. Vanity of existence. Why do we strive and toil knowing nothing lasts? This is the heart of Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of the vanity of existence, a stark reflection on the futility of life. For Schopenhauer, existence is a relentless cycle of striving, suffering, and inevitable decline. He wrote, the vanity of existence is revealed in the whole form existence assumes in the infiniteness of time and space, contrasted with the finiteness of the individual. In both we are fleeting beings adrift in an infinite, uncaring cosmos. Schopenhauer argued that life is driven by the will to life, an insatiable force compelling us to survive, reproduce, and chase desires, yet every fulfilled desire only gives way to new ones. All satisfaction, he declared, is only negative, the removal of a desire, and its pain. This endless yearning mirrors Copus endlessly pushing his boulder uphill in daily life. This truth becomes evident. A new achievement, possession or recognition, provides fleeting joy, but the satisfaction dissolves, leaving us wanting again, even acts of creation, love, or legacy Schopenhauer saw as attempts to mask the void. Time erodes all achievements, even the grandest empires crumble. What has been and is no more, he wrote, always seems better than what is now. Schopenhauer didn't seek despair, but clarity. He believed recognizing life's futility allowed us to escape its grip through art, philosophy, and especially music, which offered moments of liberation from endless striving. Life is a mistake, not just human life, but all life, the predator hunting its prey, the insect devoured by a larger beast, the endless cycle of birth, suffering, and death. Ism, a radical philosophy, doesn't just question human existence, it questions the very fabric of life itself. It asks us to consider an unsettling idea. What if the kindest, most ethical act isn't to sustain life, but to end it? Imagine a factory that's been running for billions of years. It turns out living beings endlessly, each one programmed to fight for survival, experience suffering, and inevitably die. This factory isn't guided by intelligence or purpose. It runs blindly, its only goal being the replication of DNA. This is the process of evolution. The engine of life. Fists argue that this machine is fundamentally broken, and worse, it is cruel. Life, they claim, is a mindless system that perpetuates suffering for no higher reason. To understand this, let's look at nature. Picture a lion chasing a zebra. To survive, the lion must kill and eat the zebra. The zebra, desperate to live, flees in terror. But neither animal chose this game. The lion hunts out of hunger, and the zebra runs out of fear. The suffering of one is the survival of the other. Nature's so-called balance is at its core a bloodbath. Epists see this as not just a tragedy, but as evidence that life itself is inherently flawed. But ism doesn't stop at the natural world. It applies its critique to human life as well. Think about your daily existence. Even in the best circumstances, we are burdened by the inevitabilities of aging, illness, and death. Our joys are fleeting, and our struggles are unending. For every moment of happiness, there are countless moments of frustration, loss, and despair. And this isn't just true for humans. Every sentient being, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal, is caught in the same trap. Epsom argument is simple yet profound. Evolution, the process that brought life into existence, doesn't care about the well-being of the creatures it creates. Its only purpose is to ensure survival and reproduction, no matter the cost. In this sense, life is not a miracle or a gift. It is a relentless cycle of need, pain, and eventual death. Epists believe that continuing this cycle is not just pointless, but ethically wrong. Now imagine you're holding a switch. If you flip it, all life in the universe would painlessly cease to exist. No more suffering, no more fear, no more endless struggle. Would you do it? This thought experiment captures the essence of epismith music, of hatred for life, but of compassion for all living beings trapped in its cycle. Epists argue that true kindness lies in ending suffering altogether, even if that means extinguishing life itself. Critics of ism often label it as extreme or nihilistic, but epists counter that their perspective is rooted in logic and empathy. They ask, if you wouldn't willingly subject someone to endless pain and hardship, why would you allow the continuation of a system that guarantees suffering for countless beings? For Fist, the solution is clear: to stop the factory, to end the machine, to bring life's cruel experiment to a close. It's a perspective that shocks, provokes, and challenges the very foundations of how we view existence. Ism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting truths. Instead, it forces us to confront life's harshest realities and ask ourselves an impossible question: is existence worth the cost? The problem of suffering. Why does suffering exist if we live in a world capable of producing beauty, joy, and love? Why is it also filled with pain, loss, and cruelty? This question, known as the problem of suffering, has haunted humanity for centuries. It challenges our understanding of existence, morality, and even the nature of the universe itself. At its core, the problem of suffering is not just about why suffering occurs, but what it means and how we should respond to it. Suffering takes many forms, from the physical pain of injury to the emotional anguish of heartbreak or loss. It is an undeniable part of the human condition woven into the fabric of existence. But what makes suffering so perplexing is its universal ity. No one is exempt from it, whether rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Every sentient being experiences suffering in some form. This shared reality raises profound questions. Is suffering necessary? Is it random? Or is there a deeper purpose behind? If philosophers and thinkers have approached the problem of suffering in different ways, for those who believe in a higher power, suffering poses a theological challenge. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does he allow suffering to exist? This question, often referred to as the problem of evil, has led to centuries of debate. Some argue that suffering is a test of faith or a tool for spiritual growth. Others suggest it is a consequence of human free will and necessary byproduct of our ability to choose. Yet these answers often feel incomplete. They might explain some instances of suffering, but fall short when faced with the sheer scale of pain in the world. Natural disasters, disease, and tragedies that seem to strike without reason. Secular perspectives on suffering often focus on its biological and evolutionary roots. Pain, for instance, serves an important function in alerting organisms to danger. Without the ability to feel pain, a person might not withdraw their hand from a fire or recognize the symptoms of an illness. Emotional suffering, too, has its roots in survival. Fear keeps us safe from threats, while grief helps us process loss and move forward. From this perspective, suffering is not a cosmic punishment or moral failing, but a necessary part of life's design. Yet understanding the purpose of suffering doesn't make it any easier to endure. It still leaves us questioning why life must be built on such a fragile foundation. Existential philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre viewed suffering as an inevitable part of life, one that challenges us to find meaning in an indifferent universe. And famously said, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. For him, suffering was not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced and overcome, a crucible through which we forge strength and purpose. Sartre, on the other hand, saw suffering as a consequence of human freedom. Our ability to make choices, to hope and dream, inevitably exposes us to disappointment and despair. In this view, suffering is inseparable from the human experience. It is the price we pay for the richness of life. Another approach to the problem of suffering comes from Buddhist philosophy, which places suffering at the center of its teachings. The Buddha identified suffering, or dukkha, as the first of the Four Noble Truths. According to Buddhism, suffering arises from desire and attachment. Our cravings for pleasure, permanence, and control, these desires are in conflict with the impermanent and ever-changing nature of reality, leading to frustration and pain. The Buddhist path offers a way to reduce suffering through mindfulness, ethical living, and the cultivation of wisdom. Why? While it doesn't eliminate all pain, it provides tools for understanding and managing it, offering a path to inner peace. Modern psychology also sheds light on the problem of suffering, exploring how our minds interpret and amplify pain. Research shows that much of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. For example, losing a job is undeniably difficult, but the suffering is often compounded by thought like "I'm a failure" or "I'll never succeed." Cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness practices aim to break these patterns, helping individuals reframe their experiences and reduce the emotional toll of suffering. In recent years, the problem of suffering has taken on new dimensions with the rise of artificial intelligence and transhumanism. Some thinkers argue that suffering could one day be eliminated through technology, whether by re-engineering the human brain or creating digital environments free of pain. While this vision raises ethical and philosophical questions, it also challenges the assumption that suffering is an inevitable part of life. If we could eliminate suffering, should we, or does suffering serve a deeper purpose that we would lose in the process? Ultimately, the problem of suffering is not just an intellectual puzzle. It is a deeply personal question each of us confronts. Suffering in our own lives, grappling with its meaning and impact. Some find solace in faith or philosophy, others, and the support of loved ones, or the pursuit of justice. What unites us is the shared experience of wrestling with pain, the search for meaning and hardship, and the hope for something better. Suffering is a paradox, is both universal and deeply individual, both necessary and unbearable. It reveals the fragility of life, but also its resilience. While we may never fully solve the problem of suffering, the ways we confront it shape who we are and how we live. Perhaps the greatest lesson of suffering is its ability to connect us, to remind us of our shared humanity, and to inspire compassion, courage, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. Voluntary human extinction movement. Picture a world without humans, no pollution, no deforestation, no species driven to extinction by human activity. This is the vision of the voluntary human extinction movement, a provocative and deeply controversial ideology that proposes a simple but radical solution to humanity's environmental impact: that humans should voluntarily stop reproducing and allow our species to fade into extinction for the benefit of the planet and all other forms of life. The voluntary human extinction movement is not about hatred of humanity or advocating harm at its core. It is rooted in compassion for the planet, for future generations, and for the countless species whose existence is threatened by human activity. Its founder, Les Unite, articulated the movement's philosophy as one of voluntary action. He argues that humanity's dominance over the earth has caused unparalleled harm, and the most ethical response is to step aside, allowing the natural world to heal and thrive without us. The movement asks us to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity's impact as a species. We have reshaped ecosystems, altered the climate, and driven countless species to extinction. Every year, vast tracts of forest are cleared for agriculture, oceans are polluted with plastic, and the atmosphere is filled with greenhouse gases. The voluntary human extinction movement suggests that these issues are not just byproducts of mismanagement or inefficiency, but inherent to the existence of a species as dominant and resource-intensive as humanity. Supporters of the movement argue that even the most sustainable human practices come at a cost to other life forms, while efforts to reduce our footprint through renewable energy conservation and sustainable agriculture are vital. They contend that these measures are insufficient to address the deeper issue: humanity's sheer scale and consumption for them. Voluntary extinction is not a statement of despair, but an act of altruism, a way to prioritize the needs of the planet over the perpetuation of a single species. Critics of the voluntary human extinction movement raise several objections. One of the most common is that it dismisses humanity's capacity for positive change. Humans, after all, are not only destructive, but also creative and compassionate. We have developed technologies that can restore damaged ecosystems, discovered ways to mitigate climate change, and advocated for the rights of other species. Critics argue that instead of disappearing, humanity should focus on becoming better stewards of the earth, finding ways to coexist harmoniously with other life forms. Another critique is the philosophical question of whether extinction is inherently better for the planet. Without humans, the natural world would undoubtedly recover, but the cycle of life would still involve suffering, predation, disease, and competition. Are fundamental aspects of ecosystems. The absence of humans might alleviate certain pressures, but it would not eliminate pain and struggle from the natural world. The movement also sparks ethical questions about how humanity values itself. Is it possible to promote voluntary extinction without diminishing the inherent worth of human life? Supporters of the movement believe it is emphasizing that their philosophy is not about misanthropy or self-hatred, but about recognizing humanity's unique position of responsibility. By choosing not to reproduce, they argue, we acknowledge the power we hold over the planet and make a conscious decision to reduce harm. The voluntary human extinction movement forces us to think deeply about the nature of progress and our place in the world. It challenges the assumption that growth, whether economic, technological, or population-based, is inherently good. Instead, it asks whether true progress might lie in restraint, in stepping back to allow other forms of life to flourish. This perspective shifts the focus from human-centric narratives of achievement to a broader view of the planet as a shared home. While the movement's ultimate goal may seem extreme or unrealistic, its underlying message resonates with many who are concerned about the state of the environment. It highlights the urgency of addressing humanity's impact and sparks important conversations about sustainability, ethics, and the future of life on Earth, whether or not one agrees with the idea of voluntary extinction. The movement serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked human activity and the moral responsibility that comes with being the dominant species. The voluntary human extinction movement does not seek to impose its philosophy on others. Instead, it invites reflection on the long-term implications of our choices as individuals and as a species. In doing so, it challenges us to confront not only the environmental crisis, but also the values and assumption that shape how we live. The idea may be unsettling, but its purpose is to provoke thought, encouraging us to imagine a world where humanity's legacy is one of compassion, not destruction. Whether humanity chooses to adapt, change, or fade away, the questions raised by the voluntary human extinction movement will remain relevant as we navigate the complex relationship between progress and preservation. The repugnant conclusion, what if a world filled with billions of people living lives barely worth living is considered morally better than a smaller world where everyone experiences true happiness? This is the unsettling paradox known as the repugnant conclusion, a concept introduced by philosopher Derek Parfit in his book Reasons and Persons. It challenges our deepest intuitions about what makes a world morally good and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the way we think about happiness, population, and ethics. The repugnant conclusion emerges from a specific line of reasoning in utilitarian population ethics, which focuses on maximizing total happiness. Imagine a society with a small population of people who all live exceptionally good lives. Now consider adding more people to that society, each with a life that is less fulfilling but still worth living. As the population grows, the average quality of life decreases, but the total amount of happiness increases because more people are experiencing positive lives. If this logic is carried to its extreme, we end up with a world where billions of people live lives of minimal happiness, and yet this world is considered morally better because the total happiness outweighs the lower quality of individual lives. This conclusion is deeply counterintuitive. It seems absurd to suggest that a world where everyone is barely surviving could be better than one filled with deeply meaningful and fulfilling lives. Yet, under a strict utilitarian framework that prioritizes total happiness, this is the outcome. The repugnant conclusion forces us to question whether our moral instincts align with our philosophical principles. One reason the repugnant conclusion feels so troubling is that it reduces lives to numbers by focusing on the total sum of happiness. It treats people as interchangeable units of value rather than unique individuals with rich, complex experiences. This abstraction ignores the depth and diversity of human life, raising questions about whether happiness can truly be measured in such a simplistic way. Can the joy of a deeply fulfilling life be equated to the shallow contentment of many lives barely worth living? Philosophers have offered various responses to the repugnant conclusion. Some argue that the problem lies with utilitarianism itself. By focusing solely on maximizing happiness, utilitarianism fails to account for other values such as fairness, dignity, or the importance of individual flourishing. These critics suggest that we need a more nuanced ethical framework that balances the quantity of happiness with its quality. Others, like Parfit himself, have explored alternative approaches to population ethics. One proposal is the average utility principle, which prioritizes the average level of happiness in a society rather than the total amount under this principle. A smaller population with higher average happiness would be considered better than a larger population with lower average happiness. While this approach avoids the repugnant conclusion, it introduces its own set of problems. For example, it might justify actions that reduce the number of people in a society to artificially raise the average happiness, even if doing so causes harm. Another response to the repugnant conclusion is to question whether adding new people to the world has moral value at all. Some philosophers argue that morality should focus on improving the lives of existing individuals rather than creating new ones. This perspective challenges the assumption that bringing more people into existence automatically adds value to the world. It suggests that what matters is not how many people are happy, but how well those who already exist are able to live. The repugnant conclusion also has implications for real-world decisions about population and resources, for example, in discussions about global development. Policymakers often face trade-offs between improving the quality of life for a smaller number of people and providing basic needs for a larger population. The logic of the repugnant conclusion could be used to justify prioritizing sheer numbers, even if it results in widespread mediocrity. This raises ethical questions about how we balance the well-being of current and future generations. Parfit's work on the repugnant conclusion has influenced a wide range of philosophical debates, from the ethic of procreation to the moral responsibilities of governments and international organizations. It challenges us to think critically about the values we prioritize and the assumptions underlying our moral reasoning. Is happiness an objective measure of a good life, or is it too simplistic to capture the complexities of human experience? How do we weigh the needs of individuals against the needs of the collective? And what responsibilities do we have to those who do not yet exist? At its core, the repugnant conclusion is not just a paradox, but a mirror that reflects the inconsistencies in our moral thinking. It forces us to confront the tension between our intuitive judgments and the implications of our ethical theories. By grappling with this paradox, we gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and limitations of moral philosophy, and we are reminded that the pursuit of a better world often raises more questions than answers. The absurd life demands meaning, but the universe refuses to provide it. This is the heart of the absurd, a concept explored by the French philosopher Albert Camus. It describes the fundamental conflict between our human need to find purpose and the universe's cold indifference. The absurd is not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be unraveled. It is a condition of existence that we must learn to live with. Camus believed that by confronting the absurd directly, we could find a unique form of freedom. Enjoy the absurd arises from our unrelenting search for answers. As humans, we crave explanations for why we exist, why we suffer, and what it all means. We turn to religion, philosophy, science, and art to satisfy this hunger. But no matter how hard we look, the universe remains silent. It offers no ultimate answers, no grand purpose, and no comforting design. This silence can feel like a betrayal, as though the universe is withholding something we are entitled to. Yet Camus argues this tension between our need for meaning and the universe's indifference is not a failure of existence. It is simply the way things are. The absurd is not just a theoretical idea, it is something we encounter in everyday life. Imagine working tirelessly toward a goal only to realize that it doesn't bring the satisfaction you expected, or consider the repetition of daily routines, waking up, eating, working, sleeping, and doing it all over again. These moments expose the gap between our expectations and reality, between the meaning we seek and the emptiness we often find. The absurd reveals itself in these moments not as a dramatic revelation, but as an unsettling reminder of life's contradictions. For Camus, the absurd is not something to escape or overcome. It is a reality to be confronted. Many people, when faced with the absurd, attempt to resolve it through what Camus called philosophical. This occurs when someone abandons their quest for meaning by embracing a pre-packaged answer, such as religious faith or ideological dogma. By doing so, they surrender their freedom and reject the very tension that makes life interesting. Camus rejected this approach, insisting that the absurd must not be denied or ignored. The absurd also raises the question of whether life is worth living. If there is no ultimate purpose, why bother with existence at all? Camus called this the only serious philosophical question. His response was not resignation or despair, but defiance. He argued that the absence of meaning does not diminish the value of life. Instead, it gives us the freedom to create our own meaning. By accepting the absurd, we can live authentically, embracing the fleeting beauty and chaos of life without pretending it must serve a higher purpose. Camus used the myth of Copus to illustrate his philosophy of the absurd. In Greek mythology, Copus is condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down each time he nears the top. This endless repetition could easily be seen as a metaphor for futility and despair, but Camus reimagined Copus as a figure of rebellion and strength. He argued that Cop's task is no different from our own. We too face struggles that seem pointless in a universe without inherent meaning. Yet by embracing his fate and continuing to push the boulder, Copus asserts his freedom and defies the absurd. Camus concluded his essay by declaring one must imagine Copus happy. This vision of happiness is not about denial or false hope. It is about finding joy in the act of living itself. Even when life offers no guarantees, the absurd reminds us that our lives are ours to shape. Without a cosmic plan to follow, we are free to pursue what brings us fulfillment, whether that is love, creativity, or the simple pleasure of being alive. In this sense, the absurd is not a curse, but an opportunity to live fully and honestly. Camus' philosophy of the absurd also challenges traditional ideas of success and failure. In a meaningless universe, external measures of achievement lose their significance. What matters is not whether we accomplish great things or leave a lasting legacy, but whether we engage with life authentically and courageously. This perspective liberates us from the pressure to conform to societal expectations or chase goals that do not truly resonate with us. The absurd is not an easy philosophy to embrace. It requires us to let go of comforting illusions and face the world as it is, but in doing so, it offers a found form of freedom. It teaches us to stop searching for answers that do not exist and instead focus on the experience of living. The absurd reminds us that life's meaning is not something we find, it is something we create. In the end, the absurd is both a challenge and a gift. It asks us to confront the contradictions of existence without flinching, to live with uncertainty and still find joy. Camus believed that this acceptance of the absurd was the ultimate act of rebellion, a refusal to be defeated by life's lack of meaning. By embracing the absurd, we reclaim our freedom and discover a happiness that is uniquely our own. Life, for all its strangeness and struggle, becomes an adventure worth living. Life is a cosmic accident. Life wasn't planned, it wasn't designed, it wasn't inevitable. It's the result of a cosmic accident, an extraordinary chain of events in an indifferent universe that just happened to align in the right way. From the formation of the first atoms to the emergence of consciousness, every step of life's journey is marked by randomness and improbability. The question is, what does this realization mean for how we see ourselves, our purpose, and the nature of existence itself? To understand life as a cosmic accident, we have to look at its origins. Around 138 billion years ago, the Big Bang marked the beginning of the universe. From an unimaginably small and hot point space-time, and matter began to unfold. In these early moments, chaos reigned, particles collided, energy flowed, and over time atoms formed. Eventually, gravity began to pull these atoms together, creating stars and galaxies. This process was not directed or purposeful. It was driven by the laws of physics and the blind forces of nature within the swirling chaos of the universe. One star, a relatively ordinary star in a relatively ordinary galaxy, formed. About 46 billion years ago, around it, debris left over from its creation coalesced into planets. On one of these planets, Earth, a unique set of conditions came together: a stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, and a temperature range that allowed liquid water to exist. Again, there was no intention behind this. It was a convergence of chance and physics, a cosmic lottery that Earth happened to win. Life began in the oceans, likely as simple organic molecules formed and interacted under specific conditions. These molecules eventually gave rise to self-replicating structures, the first primitive forms of life. From there, evolution took over a process that itself is based on randomness. Mutations occur by chance, and only those that offer some survival advantage persist over billions of years. This process led to the incredible diversity of life we see today, including as conscious beings capable of reflecting on our own existence. But here's the catch: none of this had to happen if the Big Bang had been slightly different, if the Earth's orbit were slightly closer to or farther from the sun if a single mutation in our evolutionary history hadn't occurred, we wouldn't be here. The conditions that allowed for life, and especially intelligent life, are so improbable that they can feel almost miraculous, yet there is no evidence to suggest that any guiding force or higher purpose was involved. It's all the result of natural processes and countless coincidences. This realization can be both awe-inspiring and unsettling. On the one hand, it underscores how extraordinary our existence is, the odds of life arising, let alone intelligent life capable of contemplating its own origins, are astronomically low. On the other hand, it suggests that we are not central to the universe's story. The cosmos existed for billions of years before us, and will continue for billions more after we're gone. Our lives, our struggles, and even our civilizations are fleeting in the grand scheme of things. For some, this perspective raises questions about meaning. If life is an accident, does that mean it's meaningless? If the universe is indifferent to our existence, does that make everything we do pointless? These are deeply personal questions, and different thinkers have approached them in different ways. For existentialist philosophers, the absence of inherent meaning is not a problem, but an opportunity. They argue that meaning is something we create, not something we are given. The fact that life has no predetermined purpose frees us to define our own. Scientists to find inspiration in the accidental nature of life rather than diminishing its value. The randomness of existence highlights how remarkable it is. Carl Schwann, for example, famously described humans as stuff, emphasizing that the elements in our bodies were forged in the hearts of dying stars. For Schwann, this connection to the cosmos was a source of wonder and humility. It reminded us that while we may be small, we are also deeply tied to the universe that created us. Life as a cosmic accident also challenges us to rethink our relationship with the world around us. If we are the result of chance, so is every other living thing. This perspective can foster a sense of kinship with all forms of life, from the tiniest microbe to the largest whale. It reminds us that we are not separate from nature, but a part of it, a fleeting expression of the same processes that created the stars and galaxies. At the same time, this view can make us more aware of our responsibility. Life on Earth is fragile, and its continued existence depends on choices we make as a species. Understanding how improbable and precious life is can motivate us to protect it, not because of any higher purpose, but because we recognize its intrinsic value. Ultimately, seeing life as a cosmic accident invites us to embrace uncertainty. It asks us to let go of the idea that the universe owes us answers or guarantees. Instead, it challenges us to find beauty and meaning in the randomness of existence, how our lives may not have been planned, but they are ours to live, and in a universe indifferent to our presence, the very act of living, of caring, of wondering becomes a profound expression of what it means to exist. The hedonistic treadmill happiness always seems just out of reach. We chase new goals, dream of bigger achievements, and tell ourselves that if we only had more money, more success, more love, we'd finally be content. But when we get those things, the satisfaction fades, and the cycle begins again. This endless pursuit is what psychologists call the hedonistic treadmill, a concept that reveals how our search for happiness often keeps us running in place. The hedonistic treadmill, or hedonic adaptation, refers to our tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness, no matter what happens in our lives. When we achieve something we've long desired, a new job, a raise, a relationship, it brings a surge of happiness. But over time, that excitement fades as we adapt to the change. Similarly, negative experiences like losing a job or going through a breakup often cause an initial drop in happiness, but we eventually recover and return to our baseline. This cycle isn't just anecdotal. It's backed by research. Studies have shown that even life-altering events, like winning the lottery or experiencing a serious injury, don't have as lasting an impact on happiness as we might expect. People who win millions often find themselves no happier a year later than they were before. Similarly, those who experience setbacks frequently adapt to their new circumstances and find ways to regain their sense of well-being. This doesn't mean that happiness is impossible to achieve, but it does mean that our expectations about what will make us happy are often misguided. We imagine that external changes, wealth, status, possessions will transform our lives, but the truth is more complicated as we adapt to new circumstances. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary. The dream house becomes just a house. The dream job becomes just work. This adaptation is part of what keeps us on the treadmill, constantly searching for the next thing that might finally bring lasting fulfillment. The hedonistic treadmill is rooted in human evolution. Our ancestors lived in environments where survival depended on continuous effort. Staying alive required constantly seeking food, shelter, and safety, and those who became complacent were less likely to pass on their genes. This drive for more served us well in the past, but in modern society, it often leaves us feeling unsatisfied. No matter how much we achieve or acquire, it never seems to be enough. Understanding the hedonistic treadmill can help us break free from its grip. One important insight is that material wealth and external success have diminishing returns when it comes to happiness. Research shows that while money can improve well-being up to a certain point by meeting basic needs and reducing financial stress beyond that, its impact on happiness is minimal. After achieving financial stability, accumulating more wealth doesn't significantly increase life satisfaction. Yet many of us continue to chase it, believing it holds the key to happiness. Another way to step off the treadmill is to focus on experiences rather than possessions. Studies suggest that experiences like traveling or spending time with loved ones bring more lasting happiness than material goods. This is partly because experiences create memories and deepen our connections with others, while possessions tend to lose their novelty over time. Investing in relationships, personal growth, and meaningful activities can bring a sense of fulfillment that material success often fails to provide. Gratitude is another powerful tool for countering the effects of hedonic adaptation. By actively appreciating what we already have, we can shift our focus from what's missing to what's present. Practicing gratitude has been shown to increase happiness, reduce stress, and improve relationships. It reminds us that contentment doesn't come from acquiring more, but from valuing what's already in our lives. Mindfulness also plays a key role in breaking free from the hedonistic treadmill. By cultivating awareness of the present moment, we can learn to appreciate the simple pleasures of life without constantly striving for more. Mindfulness helps us recognize when we're caught in the cycle of wanting and reminds us that happiness is not a destination, but a state of being. While the hedonistic treadmill highlights the challenges of maintaining happiness, it also reveals our resilience. Our ability to adapt to both positive and negative experiences is a testament to the human capacity for growth and recovery. Life will always bring ups and downs, but understanding how hedonic adaptation works can help us approach these fluctuations with greater awareness and balance. The hedonistic treadmill doesn't mean we should stop striving or setting goals. Ambition and progress are essential parts of life, but it does challenge us to rethink why we pursue certain things and whether they truly bring the satisfaction we seek. It invites us to step back and ask whether we're running towards something meaningful or simply running in circles. Ultimately, the treadmill isn't about the things we chase, it's about how we engage with life. By shifting our focus from external achievements to internal contentment, we can begin to move away from the endless cycle of striving and toward a deeper, more lasting sense of happiness. The treadmill may be a part of human nature, but with awareness and intention, we can learn to walk at our own pace, savoring the journey instead of endlessly chasing the finish line. Quietism. What if the best way to solve the problems of life is to stop trying to solve them altogether? This is the provocative idea at the heart of quietism, a philosophy that encourages us to let go of the struggle for answers and accept life as it is. Quietism isn't about resignation or defeat. It's about stepping back from the endless noise of human ambition and finding peace in simplicity and stillness. To understand quietism, imagine a person standing in a river fighting against the current. They expend all their energy struggling to move forward only to stay in the same place or be swept backward. Quietism suggests that instead of resisting the flow of the river, we should surrender to it, allowing ourselves to be carried along. This doesn't mean giving up, it means recognizing the futility of certain struggles and choosing a path of harmony instead. The origins of quietism can be traced to various philosophical and spiritual traditions in Western philosophy. It is often associated with figures like Paro, the ancient Greek philosopher who founded skepticism. Paro believed that certainty about life's big questions is impossible, and that striving for such certainty only leads to anxiety and frustration. His solution was to embrace a state of suspension where one refrains from making definitive judgments and instead approaches life with equanimity and openness. For Paro, this state of detachment was the key to achieving inner peace. In early modern Europe, quietism took on a spiritual dimension, with the work of thinkers like Miguel de Molinos, a Spanish priest who advocated for a contemplative life, focused on surrender to the divine. Molinos argued that the soul finds true peace not through effort or action, but through complete stillness and trust in God. This version of quietism emphasized the futility of human striving in the face of divine will and called for a radical acceptance of life. Circumstances. Quietism is not limited to Western traditions. In many ways, it resonates with Eastern philosophies, such as Taoism and Zen Buddhism. The Taoist concept of wa, or effortless action, aligns closely with the quietist idea of non-striving. Similarly, Zen teachings often emphasize the importance of letting go of attachment and embracing the present moment as it is. While these traditions have distinct cultural and historical context, they share a common thread: the belief that peace comes not from control or achievement, but from surrender and acceptance. One of the central challenges of quietism is its apparent passivity. Critics argue that it can be an excuse for inaction or a way to avoid responsibility. If we simply accept life as it is, aren't we turning a blind eye to suffering and injustice? Quietists would counter that their philosophy is not about indifference, but about perspective. They suggest that much of our suffering comes not from the world itself, but from our attempts to impose our will on it. By stepping back, we can see things more clearly and act with wisdom and compassion rather than being driven by ego or desperation. In the realm of philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein's later work reflects a quietist approach. Wittgenstein argued that many philosophical problems arise from the misuse of language, and that once we understand this, the problems dissolve on their own. He famously wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent for vision." Stein, the role of philosophy was not to provide solutions, but to show the limits of our understanding and help us find peace within those limits. Quietism also has implications for how we approach personal and societal challenges in a world obsessed with productivity, progress, and self-improvement. Quietism offers a countercultural perspective. It invites us to question whether our relentless pursuit of more success, more knowledge, more control is truly making us happier, or whether it is simply creating more stress and dissatisfaction. By stepping back from the constant cycle of striving, we may discover a deeper sense of contentment and clarity despite its emphasis on stillness and acceptance. Quietism is not a one-size-fits-all philosophy. It requires careful reflection and balance. For some, it may be a way to navigate the existential uncertainties of life. For others, it may serve as a reminder to slow down and focus on what truly matters. In either case, quietism challenges us to rethink our relationship with action and inaction, with control and surrender. Ultimately, quietism is a philosophy of simplicity. It doesn't promise easy answers or quick fixes. Instead, it offers a profound shift in perspective, a way to find peace not by changing the world, but by changing how we engage with it. In a noisy and chaotic world, quietism invites us to embrace silence, stillness, and the quiet power of letting go. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in striving for more, but in learning to be content with less. Philosophical music. Pessimism. Life is inherently filled with struggle, suffering, and unfulfilled desires. This stark view lies at the core of philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that challenges the optimism often associated with human existence. Philosophical pessimism doesn't aim to depress or discourage, but to confront life's harsh realities with honesty. It invites us to question our assumptions about progress, happiness, and the meaning of life itself. The foundations of philosophical pessimism are often traced back to the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, the root of human suffering is the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that drives all living beings. This will manifest as endless striving, where every fulfilled desire leads to another, creating a cycle of frustration and fleeting satisfaction. Schopenhauer believed that this relentless striving is not only exhausting, but ultimately futile, as it perpetuates dissatisfaction and suffering. Schopenhauer's view of life as inherently painful extends beyond individual struggles. He argued that suffering is woven into the very fabric of existence, affecting all living beings. Predators hunt prey, illnesses afflict the body, and death looms over every life. While moments of happiness or pleasure exist, they are temporary and have often come at the expense of others. Schopenhauer viewed these fleeting joys not as evidence of life's value, but as brief results in an otherwise grim reality. Another influential voice in philosophical pessimism is Friedrich Nietzsche, who, while often associated with existentialism, also grappled with pessimistic ideas. Nietzsche challenged Schopenhauer's resignation to life's suffering by proposing a philosophy of affirmation. He acknowledged the harshness of existence, but argued that we must embrace life's struggles and chaos as essential parts of being alive. For Nietzsche, the recognition of life's difficulties doesn't demand despair, it calls for a re-evaluation of how we confront and interpret those difficulties. Philosophical pessimism also finds resonance in the works of Romanian philosopher Emil Sorin, who took a deeply personal approach to the theme of suffering. Sorin's writing is filled with reflections on the absurdity of existence, the inevitability of death, and the fragility of human aspirations. He described life as a continuous struggle against despair, where moments of clarity often reveal the emptiness beneath our pursuits. For Sorin, pessimism wasn't a philosophy to solve, but a lens through which to see life more clearly. One of the most compelling aspects of philosophical pessimism is its critique of progress. While many people believe in the idea of continuous improvement, whether through technology, society, or personal growth, philosophical pessimists challenge this narrative. They argue that while circumstances may change, the fundamental nature of human suffering remains constant. Technological advancements might alleviate certain hardships, but they often create new forms of discontent. Similarly, societal progress may improve living conditions, but it cannot eliminate existential suffering or the limitations of mortality. Philosophical pessimism also questions the pursuit of happiness as a primary goal. It suggests that the relentless focus on achieving happiness often leads to greater disappointment, as happiness is elusive and transient. Instead of chasing an idealized state of content, pessimists encourage us to accept the imperfections and limitations of life. This acceptance doesn't mean giving up, but learning to navigate existence without the constant pressure to find ultimate fulfillment. One way philosophical pessimism offers solace is by emphasizing solidarity in suffering. By recognizing that pain and struggle are universal experiences, pessimism fosters a sense of connection and compassion. If suffering is an inevitable part of life, then our shared vulnerability can be a source of empathy and understanding. This perspective encourages us to care for one another, not because life is perfect, but because we are all navigating its challenges together. Philosophical pessimism also provides a counterbalance to overly simplistic or idealistic views of life. In a world that often glorifies positivity and success, pessimism serves as a reminder that struggle is a natural and valid part of existence. It allows us to approach life with a sense of realism, acknowledging its difficulties without being consumed by them. In this way, pessimism can be a grounding force, helping us maintain perspective in the face of hardship. Critics of philosophical pessimism often accuse it of being deep or overly negative. They argue that focusing on life's struggles risks ignoring its beauty, joy, and potential. However, many pessimists would disagree with this characterization. They don't deny that beauty and joy exist. They simply refuse to ignore the suffering that accompanies them. For pessimists, acknowledging the full spectrum of human experience, including its darker aspects, is essential to understanding and appreciating life. Philosophical pessimism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting illusions. It doesn't promise a better future or a hidden purpose behind life's struggles. Instead, it challenges us to confront existence as it is, without sugarcoating or avoidance. This confrontation, while difficult, can also be liberating. By letting go of unrealistic expectations, we can engage with life on its own terms, finding meaning in the act of living itself. Ultimately, philosophical pessimism is not a philosophy of despair, but one of honesty. It asks us to look at life without flinching, to acknowledge its hardships without turning away. In doing so, it offers a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, a mix of pain, joy, hope, and doubt, all bound together in the complex, unrelenting experience of existence. Philosophy. Humanity has built a world that often forgets its roots. Cities rise, resources are extracted, and ecosystems are reshaped, all to serve human needs. But at what cost? Eco-philosophy and deep ecology challenge this way of thinking, urging us to reconsider our relationship with the natural world. They confront the assumption that humans are the center of existence, placing all life forms and ecosystems on equal footing. Eco-philosophy is a broad field that explores the ethical, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions of the environment. It's not just about preserving nature. It's about rethinking how we perceive and interact with the world around us. It challenges the anthropocentric mindset, the belief that humans are superior to other life forms and that nature exists solely for our use. Instead, eco-philosophy proposes a holistic view of life where humans are seen as one part of a vast, interconnected web. One of the most influential movements within eco-philosophy is deep ecology, a term coined by Norwegian philosopher Are Nce in the 1970s. Deep ecology goes beyond the surface-level concerns of traditional environmentalism, such as pollution and resource management. While these issues are important, deep ecology argues that they treat symptoms rather than addressing the root cause of environmental degradation, humanity's flawed relationship with nature. Deep ecology asks us to shift from a shallow utilitarian view of the environment to a deeper understanding of the intrinsic value of all living beings. Under this framework, a tree is not valuable because it provides wood or absorbs carbon dioxide. It is valuable simply because it exists. This perspective challenges the exploitative mindset that has driven much of human progress, inviting us to see the natural world as a community to which we belong rather than a resource to be used. At the heart of deep ecology is the principle of biocentric equality, the idea that all living things have an equal right to live and flourish. This doesn't mean humans should abandon their needs or desires, but it does call for a radical reevaluation of our priorities. It asks us to consider the impact of our actions on the entire web of life, not just on ourselves. By recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, deep ecology seeks to foster a sense of humility and responsibility. The implications of deep ecology are profound. It challenges the economic systems that prioritize growth and consumption over ecological balance. It questions the narratives of human exceptionalism that have justified the destruction of habitats and species, and it calls for a transformation in how we approach everything from agriculture to energy production, emphasizing sustainability and coexistence over exploitation. Philosophers and activists within the deep ecology movement often highlight the spiritual dimensions of this perspective. They argue that reconnecting with nature is not just an ecological necessity, but a path to personal and collective well-being. Many indigenous traditions, for example, have long embraced the idea that humans are part of a larger natural order with responsibilities to the land and its inhabitants. Deep ecology draws inspiration from these worldviews, seeking to integrate them into modern environmental thought. Critics of deep ecology sometimes argue that its principles are too idealistic or impractical in a world driven by economic and political interests. They question whether humanity can truly prioritize the needs of ecosystems over its own short-term goals. Others worry that deep ecologies, emphasis on biocentric equality, could lead to difficult ethical dilemmas, such as how to balance human survival with the protection of other species. These criticisms highlight the tension between deep ecology's vision and the realities of human society. Despite these challenges, deep ecology offers a powerful lens through which to view the environmental crises of our time. It reminds us that the destruction of ecosystems is not just an environmental issue, it is a moral and philosophical failure. By treating nature as a commodity, we undermine the very systems that sustain life. Deep ecology invites us to imagine a different future, one where humanity lives in harmony with the earth, respecting its limits and celebrating its diversity. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology also provide practical guidance for individuals and communities. They encourage local sustainable practices that reduce harm to the environment. They promote education and awareness about the interdependence of life, and they inspire grassroots movements that challenge the systems and policies driving ecological destruction. These efforts may not solve every problem, but they represent a crucial step toward aligning human activities with the principles of deep ecology. Perhaps the most radical aspect of eco-philosophy and deep ecology is their call for a shift in consciousness. They ask us to move beyond seeing nature as something separate from ourselves and instead recognize that we are deeply embedded within it. This shift is not easy. It requires confronting long-held beliefs, rethinking our values, and accepting that humanity is not the pinnacle of life, but one part of a larger whole. In a world facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, the ideas of eco-philosophy and deep ecology are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to look beyond immediate solutions and address the deeper issues at the heart of the environmental crisis. They remind us that the health of the planet is inseparable from our own well-being, and that by caring for the earth, we are ultimately caring for ourselves. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology may not offer quick fixes, but they provide a vision of what is possible, a world where humanity learns to live within its means, respects the rights of all beings, and finds meaning not in domination, but in connection. This vision is both a challenge and an invitation, calling us to rethink what it means to be human in a world that is infinitely larger and more complex than ourselves. Simulation theory. What if everything you know, every moment of joy, every hardship, and every thought exists within a simulation? Simulation theory proposes that our reality might not be the fundamental one, but a creation of advanced beings or systems. It suggests that what we perceive as physical and concrete might be no more real than the world inside a video game. The implications are staggering, especially when considering suffering. If our lives are simulated, does suffering hold the same weight? And what does it mean for how we understand pain, ethics, and existence? Simulation theory gained prominence through thinkers like Nick Bostrom, who argued that if advanced civilizations develop the ability to simulate realities indistinguishable from their own, and if they choose to create many such simulations, it becomes statistically likely that we are living in one. While this idea might sound like science fiction, it rests on logical possibilities. The future development of computing power, the motivations of simulated beings, and the indistinguishability of simulated experiences from real ones. If we are indeed living in a simulation, the nature of suffering becomes deeply complicated. In a physical reality, pain and suffering are tied to biological processes, damage to the body, illness, or emotional distress. These experiences carry weight because they are directly connected to survival and well-being. But if our reality is simulated, suffering could be seen as something programmed into our experience. This raises the unsettling question: is suffering necessary in a simulated world, or is it intentionally designed into the system? One possibility is that suffering exists because it adds depth and realism to the simulation. If the beings creating the simulation intended to replicate a reality as close to their own as possible, suffering might be an inescapable part of that design. After all, struggle, loss, and hardship are integral to the human experience, shaping our choices, relationships, and sense of meaning without suffering life might lack the contrast that makes joy and fulfillment meaningful. In this sense, suffering could be viewed as a deliberate feature of the simulation, not a flaw. Another perspective is that suffering, but whether we could serve an entirely different purpose, one unknown to us. If we are part of an experiment or a study conducted by the beings who created the simulation, suffering might be a variable they are observing. It could help them understand how simulated beings respond to adversity, or how systems of morality and resilience develop under challenging conditions. In this scenario, our pain might have meaning, but not one we can comprehend. Within the limits of the simulation, this leads to profound ethical questions about the beings or entities running the simulation. If they have the power to eliminate suffering, are they morally obligated to do so? In human terms, creating a world filled with pain might seem cruel, yet it's also possible that the creators see the simulation differently, as something akin to art, a learning tool, or a system that transcends human notions of morality. Their perspective might render the concept of cruelty meaningless. The possibility of simulated suffering also forces us to reevaluate our sense of agency in a simulated world. Are our actions and choices truly our own, or are they predetermined by the system? If suffering is pre-programmed, do we have any responsibility for how we experience it or how we alleviate the suffering of others? These questions challenge the foundations of ethics and free will, leaving us to grapple with whether simulated beings can hold moral accountability for those who find simulation theory plausible. The implications for how we approach suffering in daily life are complex. On one hand, viewing suffering as part of a simulation might diminish its emotional impact. If pain is merely a construct, perhaps it doesn't need to be taken so seriously. On the other hand, the realization that suffering is programmed into the system could deepen its poignancy as it becomes a reminder of our lack of control over the fundamental nature of our reality. Yet even within the framework of simulation theory, suffering retains a profound immediacy. Whether real or simulated pain feels real to the one experiencing it. A broken bone, the loss of a loved one, or the sting of rejection affects us deeply, regardless of whether it arises from biological processes or lines of code. This highlights a paradox of simulation theory. Even if our reality is an illusion, our experiences are not diminished. They remain powerful, vivid, and deeply meaningful to us. Simulation theory also raises the possibility that we are not passive participants, but active creators within the simulation. If we are simulated beings capable of understanding the nature of our reality, could we also influence or reshape it? This idea opens up a hopeful dimension, suggesting that even in a simulated world, we might have the power to confront and reduce suffering through our actions, empathy, and ingenuity. Ultimately, simulation theory forces us to confront fundamental questions about existence and meaning. If our reality is simulated, does that make it less valuable or significant, or does the very fact that we experience consciousness, joy, and suffering imbue it with its own kind of reality? These questions are not easy to answer, but they remind us that the nature of reality, whether simulated or not, does not diminish the importance of how we live, how we treat others, and how we make sense of our lives. In the end, the possibility that we live in a simulation doesn't provide clear answers about suffering. It does, however, challenge us to rethink our assumptions about reality, agency, and the human experience. Whether our lives are the result of random chance, biological processes, or the design of an advanced civilization, our experiences remain undeniably real to us. Simulation or not, the choices we make in the face of suffering define who we are and shape the world we inhabit. Existential loneliness, no matter how connected we are, how deeply we love, or how closely we bond, there is a part of us that remains fundamentally alone. This is existential loneliness, the deep, pervasive sense of solitude that stems not from the absence of others, but from the nature of existence itself. It is the recognition that as individuals we are ultimately isolated in our inner experiences, carrying the weight of our existence alone existential loneliness is not about being physically alone. It's not the same as social isolation or the temporary feeling of missing someone. Instead, it's rooted in the realization that no one can fully understand or share the entirety of another person's inner world. No matter how well we articulate our thoughts or how closely we connect with someone, our subjective experiences remain uniquely ours. This inherent separateness is a condition of being human. Philosophers and writers have long grappled with this profound sense of isolation. Søren Kierkegaard, often regarded as the father of existentialism, spoke of the individual's relationship to existence as a solitary journey. He believed that confronting this solitude was essential for personal growth and authenticity. For Kierkegaard, the individual must face the truth of their aloneness to live a meaningful and authentic life. In this sense, existential loneliness is not just a burden, it is also a call to engage with oneself deeply and honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche explored a similar idea through his concept of the Übermensch, or Overman. He saw the journey towards self-realization as inherently solitary, requiring individuals to transcend societal norms and find their own values. For existential loneliness was a necessary part of this process. It was not something to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and individuality. The loneliness of standing apart from the crowd, of forging one's own path, was central to his vision of a fulfilled life. Existential loneliness is also tied to our awareness of mortality. As conscious beings, we understand that our lives are finite, and no one else can share the experience of our death. This knowledge creates a profound sense of solitude, as we realize that we alone must face the uncertainty of what lies beyond. For Martin Heidegger, this awareness of mortality was central to the human condition. He described the concept of being toward death and emphasizing that the inevitability of death shapes how we live and how we confront our own existence. Existential loneliness in this context is inescapable. It is woven into our awareness of life's fragility. At the same time, existential loneliness can be a source of creativity and insight. Writers, artists, and thinkers have often drawn on their experiences of isolation to create works that resonate deeply with others. Franz Kafka's writings, for instance, reflect a profound sense of alienation and solitude, yet they speak to universal feelings of disconnection. This paradox highlights one of the unique aspects of existential loneliness. While it is deeply personal, it is also a shared human experience. In acknowledging our isolation, we find a strange form of connection with others who feel the same. Existential loneliness also raises questions about the nature of relationships. Can we ever truly know another person, or are our connections ultimately limited by the boundaries of our own subjectivity? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension in his existential philosophy, particularly in his plane No Exit. He argued that while we crave connection, we often misunderstand or objectify others in our attempts to bridge the gap between ourselves and them. For Sartre, the struggle to connect authentically is an inevitable part of the human condition, yet existential loneliness is not necessarily something to overcome or fix. Many existentialists see it as an opportunity to confront the deeper truths of life. By acknowledging our aloneness, we are forced to grapple with questions of meaning, purpose, and identity on our own terms. This can be a source of anxiety, but it can also lead to profound self-discovery and growth. In this way, existential loneliness is both a challenge and a gift. It pushes us to seek understanding and authenticity in a world that often feels disconnected. Modern psychology has also explored the impact of existential loneliness on mental health and well-being. Some researchers argue that acknowledging and accepting this form of loneliness can be a pathway to resilience and self-acceptance. By understanding that existential loneliness is a natural part of life, we can move away from feelings of inadequacy or despair and focus on building meaningful connections with others. These connections may not erase our loneliness, but they can provide comfort and a sense of shared humanity. Existential loneliness is a reminder of both the limits and the richness of human experience. It forces us to face the fact that no one else can live our lives for us, think our thoughts, or feel our feelings, but it also reminds us of the value of connection, empathy, and understanding. While we may never fully bridge the gap between ourselves and others, the attempt to do so is what makes relationships meaningful. In the end, existential loneliness is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. It is simply part of what it means to be human. It challenges us to look inward, to confront our fears and uncertainties, and to find our own paths in a complex and often confusing world. By embracing our aloneness, we can learn to live with greater authenticity and openness, finding meaning not in escaping loneliness, but in facing it with courage and compassion. The red button thought experiment. Imagine a red button sitting in front of you. Pressing it would instantly and painlessly erase all of humanity. No suffering, no linger effects, just complete and total cessation of the human race. Now ask yourself, would you press it? This is the red button thought experiment, a simple but profound scenario that forces us to confront deep questions about the value of existence, the nature of suffering, and the moral weight of our choices. The thought experiment begins with the premise that humanity is deeply flawed. Wars, environmental destruction, inequality, and suffering are inescapable parts of our history. In present, the person contemplating the button is often asked to consider whether humanity's existence causes more harm than good. Is the world better off with humans, or would the absence of our species alleviate the suffering we cause both to ourselves and to the planet? The red button offers a radical solution, an end to all human suffering forever. This thought experiment is not about impulsive decision-making. It invites careful reflection on the complexities of human existence. First, it forces us to weigh the value of life itself. Is existence inherently valuable regardless of the suffering it entails? Some argue that life, even with all its imperfections, is worth preserving because it holds the potential for beauty, love, creativity, and growth. Others counter that these positive aspects of life are outweighed by the pervasive suffering experienced by countless individuals, both human and non-human. To grapple with the red button, one must also consider the nature of suffering. Some philosophers, like Arthur Schopenhauer, have argued that life is primarily a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, where fleeting moments of happiness are overshadowed by pain and struggle. From this perspective, the red button might seem like an act of mercy, ending the perpetual churn of suffering. However, others see suffering as an intrinsic part of existence, a force that gives depth and meaning to life. Without suffering, would we truly appreciate joy, love, or achievement? Another layer of the thought experiment explores the ethics of making such a decision for humanity as a whole. Even if one believes that pressing the button would eliminate that suffering, does anyone have a right to make that choice for billions of people? Humanity is not a monolith. Individuals experience life in vastly different ways. While some endure profound suffering, others find immense value and fulfillment in their lives. The red button reduces this diversity to a binary decision, assuming a single perspective can encapsulate the experience of all. There's also the question of hope. Humanity, despite its flaws, has shown remarkable resilience and capacity for change. Scientific advancements, social progress, and acts of compassion demonstrate that we are capable of addressing our problems and improving the world. Pressing the button would erase not only humanity's suffering, but also its potential. Could we ever justify ending the possibility of a brighter future, even in the face of current hardships? For those who lean toward pressing the button, environmental considerations often play a significant role. Humans have caused immense harm to the planet, driving species to extinction, polluting ecosystems, and altering the climate. Without humanity, the Earth might recover, returning to a state of natural balance. But this raises a further question: does the planet itself have intrinsic value independent of human perception? If humanity is gone, who will witness or appreciate the Earth's restoration? And does that matter? The thought experiment also invites us to examine our own biases and emotions. For some, the urge to press the button might stem from personal despair or frustration with humanity's failings. For others, the decision to abstain may be rooted in an instinctive aversion to causing harm. Even hypothetically, the red button exposes the tension between reason and emotion, challenging us to think critically about our motivations and values. A compelling twist to the experiment is the possibility that the red button is an illusion, a test designed not to be pressed. In this interpretation, the presence of the button itself is a challenge to humanity's self-awareness and ethical reasoning. By choosing not to press it, we affirm our belief in the worth of existence despite its imperfections. The button becomes a mirror reflecting our hopes, fears, and beliefs about what it means to be human. Ultimately, the red button thought experiment is less about the act of pressing or not pressing the button and more about the questions it raises. It forces us to confront the profound complexity of existence, where suffering and joy, destruction and creation, despair and hope are all intertwined. It challenges us to think deeply about the nature of life, the ethics of choice, and our place in the universe. The thought experiment doesn't provide easy answers, nor is it meant to. Its purpose is to provoke reflection, encouraging us to examine our values and assumptions. In the end, the red button remains unpressed, not because the decision is clear, but because the act of wrestling with its implications is what makes the question so powerful. Through this exploration, we come to understand more about ourselves, our relationship to humanity, and the weight of choices that shape existence itself.